So welcome everyone again and hope you enjoy the show today. Now I'll turn the screen over to Dawoon and Sang.
Thanks, Yoon. Glad to be here. Taon, I think we have some mutual friends, but it seems the first time we've actually met in person is over Zoom, thanks to Korea Society. Really glad to be here. Thanks to COVID, I guess. Before we get started down like the official question path, why don't you let the audience know a little bit more about yourself? We did the formal intro. Why don't you let the audience know a little bit more about yourself, how you found yourself to be the co-founder of Coffee Meets Bagel?
Yeah, hi everyone. It's so great to meet you and to be back here with the society. I can't believe it's been 6 years since I've been on the show. Time goes by really fast. I think when you're being an entrepreneur. I am from Korea originally. I came here to the US when I was 13, immigrated with my sisters, and started at this company with my sisters as well. I think just growing up in the States without our parents, the three of us formed a really strong relationship, which became the foundation to us being able to work together. And I stumbled upon actually on starting a dating company, which we can, I'm sure, get into. It was never, I never grew up thinking that I was going to be in the dating space or, maybe even act as a matchmaker. But as I really learned more about how people date, and how do we actually solve the problem of love, which is a very, very difficult problem, I feel extremely gratified and lucky to be able to work on a problem that's really profoundly impact and transform people's lives. And so it's become a field of studies that has really fascinated me. And I feel really grateful to be working in that space.
Thank you. Thanks, Tal. That was awesome. I mean, why don't we like flesh out that portion a little bit, right? So what was that first question that you and your sisters had in order to start CMB, right? What was that kind of eureka moment that you thought this was a great opportunity to make an impact?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't think we had a eureka moment. It wasn't like there isn't a single point of like a moment that I can think back to, like, was the origin of Coffee Meets Bagel. But just to give a full context, I grew up in an entrepreneurial family, and my dad was an entrepreneur. He actually started his company with his brother. And so my sisters and I grew up looking at him and my uncle just pouring their hearts and time over building. It was a scrap metal business in Korea that they started out of college. And he would always come home late and always be talking about how he can innovate in this space, which was a big inspiration for us. And he always took us to the factory and would actually design his own machines as well. He was a mechanical engineer. And my mom also operated like a small restaurant on her own. So I feel really extremely lucky that entrepreneurship was something that I grew up to be I was exposed to since I was very little. It was something that was really familiar to me. And so when people ask me like, oh, how did you think about starting a new company, especially as a woman, which it's not very common to see a female entrepreneur. And I really think it's a function of an exposure that you receive when you're young. Right. And so anyway, so then we always knew that we were going to start something together as sisters. And, back in 2012, when we got together, among the three of us, we had 10 plus years of working experience, and we felt more confident about being able to do this. So we started searching for an idea. We didn't have a good idea. We started searching for it. We knew that it was going to be in consumer because we are very much interested in working on something that impacts people's lives directly. Yeah. And dating just kept coming up as a problem that a lot of people were facing, including some of us. One of us was single and dating at the time. and so we started looking at it because of that. And there were opportunities that we saw. There were it's a competitive space. It was then, it still is, but there was a white space that we saw, and we found it really interesting enough to really get us to want to work on it. Right. So that was kind of the genesis of it.
Got it. And so you had the idea, well, I guess one of you were dating, so it was kind of like sparked a discussion around it. And, probably at or around the time there, the dating app space probably was kind of up and coming. There are other kind of contenders in the space as well, right? Without giving away any proprietary secrets, like what did you think was like the niche or your particular approach to C&B that would differentiate you from the rest of the audience?
Yeah, when we saw the market, what we saw was that a lot of dating brands were focused on quantity. And dating is a numbers game to a certain extent. Like if you actually don't end up seeing anyone, of course, you're not going to meet anyone. But it was so geared towards like swiping and searching, like let's just actually like present as many people as possible in front of daters and let them choose, which has its own benefit, but also can be a very overwhelming experience, especially for a woman when you have that much of a volume. Online dating and dating is a very kind of a gender specific experience.
Yeah.
And a lot of women tend to get a lot of messages and a lot of pings. And so it's a very suboptimal experience I think for everyone, but especially for women. And so we thought, hey, like, why don't we actually take the opposite approach of putting a lot of emphasis on quality? We wanted to target busy young professionals, so they don't have time to. Well, I don't have time to filter through just this gazillion profiles. I don't even want to, even if I have the time. And so why don't we do the work for them? Really emphasis on quality. Really focus on building a platform that is geared towards people who are looking for long-term relationship. So that was our angle, and that still to date is why. If you ask any Coffee Meets Bagel daters, why do you use Coffee Meets Bagel? We don't have the largest pool in the market, right? We're not the largest platform. And it's because of our relentless focus on making long-term relationship happen and our focus on quality over quantity.
Got it. And what's the genius behind the name? Like, where does Coffee Meets Bagel come from?
Yeah, so Coffee Meets Bagel is it's a very polarizing name. Some people love it, some people hate it. I love it, obviously. And the origin of it is because the model of Coffee Meets Bagel is every day at noon we curate you, limit a number of matches who we think are quality matches for you, and we were targeting young professionals. And so we said, okay, hey, what is one thing that every young professional look forward to on a daily basis? Well, coffee break. And what goes really well with coffee, we chose bagel because we started in New York City. So we kind of wanted to pay homage to New York City. So it's Coffee Meets Bagel. It's a really fun, quirky name, I think, and something that really sticks to you when you hear it.
Got it. And, as I think a lot of our audience has known it, and myself personally as well, but like C&B was geared toward, I guess, the Asian American audience in the beginning. Is it still that way right now? Was that the initial target that you guys were working toward?
No, it wasn't. It was never geared towards Asian Americans specifically. It really was geared towards young professionals who are very busy, don't have a lot of time, don't want to waste time, and who are looking for something more substantive than casual meetups. They're looking for long-term partner. So that was the audience that we focused on, and that still is the audience that we focus on. I think because we grew from word of mouth, the first one of the most common questions I get asked is like, how did you actually get your first, couple hundred daters, right, to use Coffee Meets Bagel? Well, it's just my friends, like my friends and friends of friends and friends of friends. And of course, being Korean myself, I did have a lot of Asian American friends, and they started using it. They started telling their friends about it. So I think just to this day, we spend almost $0 on marketing. We have a marketing team, of course, but we actually don't spend a lot of media spend. So 100% of our growth is word of mouth. And so when you grow that way, you kind of, I think like the first kind of set of like a user base that you accumulate has a huge influence on who they end up inviting. And I think so by us being kind of Asian ourselves, I think that's why we actually came to grow a very strong user base among the Asian American community, but it was never like our intention.
Right. Okay, Got it. And we were talking about, I guess CMB's focus is to secure like long-term relationships, right? So people that are looking to get in it for the long haul. Can you share some experiences on successful matches that have been made on CMB?
Well, for one thing, I've had two very successful long-term relationships through Coffee Meets Bagel myself, and so I can very confidently say, oh yeah, this product really, really works. And I joke, I have a dating podcast that I run as a chief dating officer, and one of the people want to know like how much did I actually date. I went on a ton of dates through Coffee Meets Bagel. Like I did find two of I'm a straight woman, so two of my boyfriends on Coffee Meets Bagel. Went on more than probably like well over 100 first dates, and a couple of like up there like second dates, and like I can tell you from my own experience that every single person that, like, no joke, like I'm not even exaggerating, every single person that I actually met were very, very good, decent, quality people. Didn't end up working out right, like romantically, but like I actually keep in touch with a lot of them as a friends also. So that is one anecdote that I can share. And of course we have hundreds of thousands of couples that we currently like can't even we kind of lost track of how many. We actually just had it's so heartening to see somebody just sent an Instagram story and tagged us of a diaper that they made, celebrating Coffee Meets Bagel because they have they have a baby together, and so a lot of heartwarming stories.
Yeah. Well, Dawoon, we won't say that you're biased by talking about your own experiences and how great it was. And I won't go into the fact that you said two, which means they've ended.
But I said that this is the thing. I think a lot of, I'm trying to shift daters' mindset from, hey, if you shared a great relationship with somebody and just because it ended doesn't mean it was not successful, right? Like, while you were in it, you were in love, you had a great experience. And even marriages that come to an end, I don't think that's a failed marriage. And so that's a mind shift that I'm trying to encourage our daters to have, because I don't want anyone to think that love is wasted just because it comes to an end. I think as long as it helps us grow, helps us experience, that's success in my mind.
Absolutely. And so, dating is it's an in-person activity, right? And we always kind of joke about it, even in my business as well. Like, financial services is in person. Like, you got to shake their hand, you got to have a stake. And I think COVID has changed the perspective on everything. Quite frankly, it's accelerated certain things. It's put certain things at a complete standstill. But I would think that people think dating should be in person. There is a bit of intimacy that does occur there. And how did COVID change for CMB your perspective on looking at business, and what are people thinking about dating, like going into this new world, if you will?
Yeah, it's a very interesting time, needless to say, right? And I think I'll just kind of address the business aspect first. I do think COVID and this like level of forced adoption of things like remote working has completely shifted the I don't want to say biases, but like preconceived like notion that a lot of us had about what works and what doesn't. So for example, I actually recently permanently relocated to Hawaii. So I'm actually doing this show from Hawaii. And this is something that I've been wanting to do for a very long time. But even though our company is very remote friendly, and we had a lot of people who were working remotely already before COVID, there was a lot of concerns and anxiety around executive members, like CEOs, and then the C-suite members not working out of the headquarter, which is SF. And so it was an idea that we've discussed, and like minimizing SF office and like, I mean, it's expensive. There's a lot of practical business reason to not have a headquarter, but I think we are, human beings just by nature is, what do you call it? Like, creature of habit and familiarity. And whenever there's a change coming up, there is an instant, it doesn't matter if it's good or bad, there's an instant kind of resistance because it's uncertain what's going to happen. And so I could not make the move for a while. And only when we actually had COVID and everybody's working remotely anyway, and then we were like, oh, actually, this is not that bad, and it's not the greatest, because I do think there is we do have to whiteboard, and there's sometimes we have to get together to really like feel that connection. So it's not ideal, but what we're finding is that in reality, nobody actually wants to come in the office 5 days a week. Really, like we surveyed, and like they want to come in the office like once or twice maximum, or even like once every couple of weeks just to connect, but they don't want to come into the office every day. And so I think it really is kind of uncovering like things that we were like just adopting because it's just the way it was, and allowing us to question, like, do we have to really operate this way? Which I think is a really great thing. And I think dating is the same. One of the biggest change that we're seeing is this like notion, like, do you actually need to physically meet in order for us to be able to develop a relationship, right? And yes, it is very important aspect, like being able to, like the physical chemistry, like how can you deny that, right? That is a huge part of romantic relationship. And can you really actually get that through Zoom? There's only so much. So at certain point, you do have to physically meet, but do you really need that from the very beginning? That really is what we're finding. Like more and more people are engaging on video. In fact, a lot of people who are trying video are telling us it's a better way to engage because one, it saves me time, it's convenient, and actually it gets them to build that emotional bond ahead of like getting into this like a physical aspect, which in a way you could argue that it's better for the long-term relationship. And so when we actually survey the CMB daters, like people who are trying video date, like 80-90% of the people say, hey, even after COVID, I'm still going to actually do this. I'm going to continue video dating for the at least like first or second dates, because I find it really convenient. And like 70% plus people are telling us that it is possible to assess chemistry and connection through video. It's not impossible. And so while I get the reservation among some daters, like, hey, I don't think this is a good time to date right now. And they've completely shut off, like they don't use dating apps anymore. And we kind of saw it in the number when COVID first started hitting. We did see a dip in new user signups. And, I totally understand the sentiment, but again, I get that my answer is biased, but when I see the daters who do try out video dating and continue to date, I actually think this is a great time to date. Again, because people are taking longer time to get to know each other, to build that emotional connection, to have conversations before they actually do something more dramatic, or even meeting up feels dramatic now. And that I think is really key actually to building a successful long-term relationship.
Right. And for your business personally, like from CMB's perspective, how did you make that? How did it make the transition? How did it affect the business? Did you like create new features for like the online dating thing that people needed to engage with? Like what were the changes that were made in addition to the remote work and you moving to Hawaii? What were the other changes that were made for the consumer base?
Yeah, so there are a lot of changes. I think as with all businesses this year, I mean, it was such a challenging time, right? Because you see your business metrics turning, and I feel very grateful that we were not in certain industry that just went to zero. That wasn't us. So, like really just very grateful for that. And at the same time, like, so you're dealing with these metrics, and then you're dealing with like your employee base for experiencing COVID also, right, outside of work. Like there a lot of our employees are parents, and now they're like stuck at home with their children. And so while there's more stuff to worry about and think about at work, there's actually more stuff everywhere to think about and worry about. So I think it really was challenging year for everyone this year. So a couple of things, like for daters, we had to take pretty dramatic actions very quickly. So
Yeah.
I mean, we had a bunch of things on the roadmap that we just had to be like, okay, we're not doing this.
Yeah.
And then, the whole notion of Coffee Meets Bagel was built around meeting up, right? Like we actually have even 7-day chat system where like the chat expires after 7 days because we want you to get off the platform and just actually physically meet. That didn't make any sense anymore. So we had to get rid of that. We actually ended up quickly spinning up this feature called Coffee Talk. And this came out of a series of focus group that I started conducting across the US and internationally as well. Like we just started talking to daters, like, hey, what is it like to be dating right now? Are you dating? Like, what are you doing right now? And so to understand what's going on, and what we saw was like this deep desire to just connect and hang out with somebody. Like when you're single and you're living alone, which a lot of us do, wow, like COVID was so freaking hard because now you can't even connect with your own friends, let alone like meet somebody new. And so there was such a strong desire to just connect with human being. And so we started conducting this thing called Coffee Talk, which was a video virtual hangout. Like it wasn't really just even for dating. It was just to provide a platform for all daters to share what they're going through, so that it doesn't feel like they're the only ones going through this right now. And so it was very popular. We hired a bunch of moderators to do this, and we did it all the way up until June. And then kind of stopped it when we saw that people were starting to actually physically meet up because the lockdown restriction was easing. So yeah, those are a few examples of things that we spun up as a result of COVID.
Right. As a fellow founder, and I think for some of the audience, being an entrepreneur is not easy. It has its own, I think sufficient variables without a global pandemic hitting, that you have to deal with on a daily basis, right? So, from your experience, I mean, you guys were able to successfully kind of transition. Thankfully, things came back a bit to normalcy. People were able to meet. But as a founder, what was going through your head, right? When this happened, when lockdown started happening, how did you filter through, I guess, what I was feeling at the time anyway, which is panic. First about, my team members getting sick, right? And then their kids getting sick, their families getting sick. Then about how this was going to change the business or the world, right? And it's one variable you don't really need as an entrepreneur, which is how's the world going to change? So, what was going through your head and how did you deal with it?
Well, panic, like I think, like you mentioned in the beginning. And of course, there were a lot of sleepless nights, and we did have to think about, we were actually getting ready to scale our marketing and all that stuff, like scrap that and just kind of, let's actually just bring up a little bit more conservative, because we just didn't know where the world was going. And so we kind of went into okay, let's really focus on profitability and preserving, defending what we have. And with that came a lot of tough decision as well. Of course, we were setting things up for scaling, and when you're doing that and not doing that anymore, there needs to be changes made. So and you need to do it really quickly. So those were really tough. I think in a way, it's interesting. Like when you're an entrepreneur and you're you almost there's an expression you almost want to will your way into success, right? Like if the world is giving me all this shit, then I'm gonna, excuse my language, then I'm gonna just with my sheer will, I'm gonna destroy this. But I think as entrepreneurs, we often forget really if you realistically, not everything is within your control. And so there's just certain things that you should not be worrying about that you end up spending a lot of time worrying about. At least I did. And ironically with COVID, because it was such a huge change, it actually made it a little bit easier for me to just surrender in a way. So I just kind of was you know what? This is something way out beyond my control. I'm just going to control what I can, and the rest is up to the universe, really, at this point.
Right.
And I think that actually, this like the element of surrendering gave me quite a bit of peace in a way, and not agonize over every single decision that I'm about to make.
Right.
Which I think is a good thing, that a mentality that I want to carry forward, COVID or not, because the reality is that there's so many things that are out of our control, and you can only control things that you can control. There's nothing productive that comes out of worrying and trying to control what you can't control. And so it was a good lesson for me, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm completely commiserating with the will, will yourself to survival, right? Will through just a concrete wall. But I definitely understand that. I mean, as difficult as COVID was, I think, for a lot of successful founders like yourself, I think there's also opportunity, right? So crisis presents itself in like kind of a bizarre way, and particularly coming out of it, if you look at it, and obviously hindsight is 2020, but sometimes there are opportunities that arise, or things that we talked about before, like accelerated, right? People wouldn't have done this, in 3 years unless COVID had happened. Is there anything like that for CMB that you guys saw looking back? Wow, like, that was an actual opportunity that we seized.
Yeah, I mean, many. And when we first started COVID, when it not first started COVID, like when we first started experiencing COVID back in March, what I told my team is like, hey, don't know how this is going to end. Like, I can't pretend to know that this is going to have this is going to end like a certain time. Like, I have no idea. But this kind of challenging time is when like your true character comes out. And I think this is chance for us to really show how strong of a team we are. And that definitely has come true, I think, over the last 9 months, even though we have not physically been working together, really brought the team together. I mean, we've had highest satisfaction rating, lowest turnover rating. This year was like in record level in terms of like employee engagement.
Right.
And we've started communicating a lot more, just because in the virtual world you just have to. And also with so much uncertainty, I just started communicating a lot more the state of the business and where we are. And that has become like the transparency has become, we've always been very good at it, but we've become even better. But I think it was just a really great year to fortify and strengthen our culture, which is going to be a huge benefit for the long run.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is, even though we saw a dip in the business metrics and whatnot, in the long run, this is going to be really great for this industry, because right now, literally, if you want to meet somebody, like, you have to online date. There's no other alternatives. You can't go to a bar. You're not going to go to an event, right? Yeah. And so in the long run, it's like, we're still kind of seeing, it's not like we're seeing huge spike, but in the long run, it's going to be good, really good for the industry. And I mean, again, like with things like video, it's going to make our value proposition, like dating a value proposition, much, much greater. Yeah. So I think those are some of the things that I can think about. And because I personally am very passionate about enabling people to be able to work in an environment that they actually want to be in, it was a gift for myself and also for my team to be able to actually make this remote thing a permanent, like a part of Coffee Meets Bagel. Yep. And being able to work, on strengthening that remote culture.
Right. So, I mean, that's a perfect transition, because that was kind of my next question, which was, I want to talk about Hawaii, right? First of all, why you chose Hawaii, how Hawaii is right now. I understand that it went through its own kind of quarantine process, like pseudo lockdowns. So how things are going in Hawaii. And I think for a lot of founders, that is a question, right? The question of, I used to do my team meetings. I used to do the brainstormings in person, right? It's so hard. And in the beginning for me too, talking online to a bunch of floating heads was exhausting, right? Like sitting at the laptop for 7 hours, just staring at the screen. Like it didn't seem very productive. It felt like I was repeating myself over and over again, right? But I think a lot of founders have the same question right now. Like, what are some tips that you have for allowing a team to be remote? but still being effective, right?
Mhm.
And how does it feel to be C-level in Hawaii? Is my question.
Well, so the reason why I chose Hawaii is because I actually grew up here. I went to
Okay,
high school here. This is where I immigrated first when I moved to the US from
got it.
Korea. And so it's a special place for me. And I've always kind of wanted to, not always, but over the last few years have kind of come to miss it. So that's why I'm here.
Yeah.
And I think tips on remote culture, like there are a lot of tactical tips, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, have a very good communication plan. And we do have all these protocols, but I think the most important thing is having a culture of trust, which honestly doesn't happen
Mhm.
overnight, right? If you're not with somebody and you can't really see them doing things and you have no idea what they're doing, and sometimes you chat to them on Slack and they don't respond, and you could be wondering, where are they, right?
Yeah.
If you don't have a culture of trust, it's going to be such a huge distraction to your team. Like, imagine your managers like trying to manage a team they don't
Mhm.
trust, and they don't hear a response for them for a couple hours,
Yeah.
and this manager is going to go crazy. Like, where
Right.
is my team? Like, what are they doing? Are they getting, like, if you, and it's going to be such a distraction to that
Yeah.
person. And so, and again, unfortunately, that takes a really long time to build.
Yeah.
And like a lot of repetition, a lot of small act of trust building that kind of builds up to this being able to trust. And Coffee Meets Bagel was not perfect. I'm sure there's, and it's never the end, right? You constantly have to work on it to build it and maintain it. But I think just being aware of how important it is to the foundation of this whole thing. And I feel very lucky that we've emphasized. We have this model called, I don't know if you've heard of, like, 5 dysfunctions of a team by Patrick
Mhm.
Lencioni. That's a model, that's a framework that we use for what constitutes a high performing team.
Mhm.
And basically the model is like a pyramid, and it talks about, it observed, like, a couple hundred teams that's consistently achieving results and
Yep.
what they actually have in common. And what they found is that trust is the foundation of everything, because without trust there is no conflict, like being able to actually
Right.
talk frankly about what's working, what's not working. And without that there's no commitment, and without that there's no accountability, and without that there's no results.
Right.
And so we've used that model for a very long time, talking about how important trust is to our success and our happiness. And I think that's been really paid off in our remote culture.
Got it. Got it. And what do you see, I guess, evolving for CMB, for business as a whole? Maybe you can give some ideas on what you think the world is going to look like for the founders in our audience.
World's going to look like for businesses or daters?
Let's go with daters first, and then let's go into business. How about that?
I think for daters, so virtual connection is here to stay. Like, it's still a minority. Like, when we last surveyed, like, hey, have you tried video dating? I think the latest number that we saw was 30%. When we actually did this in March, it was about 12%. So it did double, but it's still the
Mhm.
minority. And I think more and more people are going to adopt
Mhm.
video as like the first kind of way to kind of introduce and build connection. I kind of imagine a situation where it's like no brainer, that you're not even asking, like, hey, like, when you connect, it's like, yeah, of course we're going to do video.
Yeah.
So I kind of see us going that way, in COVID or not. Like,
Mhm.
I don't think this is COVID related. The trigger point is COVID, but I think it's here to stay even after vaccination comes out. And one other interesting thing that we're finding is that I think COVID is really making people rethink about their life and their
Mhm.
priorities and what's important to them. And we're seeing a lot more people moving towards, like, I don't want to, I mean, that was the audience that we're already targeting, but even outside of CNV daters, what we're hearing more anecdotally is people just wanting to focus their priorities on long term. And so instead of kind of
Mhm.
just, meeting somebody for fun, I really want to have a long-term partner. And I think, especially because we're, single and like just being on our own, it makes you think more, right? About, okay, what kind of partner do I want to be with? And so I think there's going to be more and more desire for people to have long-term relationship.
Yeah.
And then as a business, I think it's like, of course, I can't really predict what's going to happen in the future, but like, my sense is that like this COVID incident has awakened all the business kind of owners and executives to the importance of how important it is to cultivate a company or culture that can respond quickly to changing factors.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, like, of course, you're not going to predict what kind of changes are coming, but you have to be prepped that your organization is able to respond to whatever changes that come. And that, I think, again, goes back to culture and how team operates and work together. So probably there's going to be a lot more emphasis on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Like, it's not just resilience anymore. I think it's the ability to be dynamic and flexible without like changing the underlying, right, like foundation of it all is going to be a key factor for a lot of successful businesses. We have a couple of questions that we do want to kind of throw in there, some interesting stuff that I think we received. So one of the blogs, Dating Around the World, there was a listing of easiest cities to date. So Hong Kong was ranked as #1 for men. And I don't know when this was, unfortunately, and Sydney for women. So I guess just in context, what makes a city easier to date in versus other cities?
Right. So that particular study, the way we kind of defined it is the kind of like the pickiness of the opposite gender, like the gender you're looking for, your gender preference. So for example, like we said Hong Kong is I'm sorry for the background noise if you guys are hearing this, but Hong Kong is the easiest place for, I think, straight men to date is what we said. And it's because what we found is that a straight woman in Hong Kong on average, statistically, so it's not individualized, they just like more men, meaning like if I'm making it up, if the US average woman like their matches 20% of the time, we're finding that in Hong Kong, straight women like their matches 30% of the time. And so, of course, if you're liking more, then as a guy, you have better chance of connecting. So that's kind of what we meant.
Got it. Okay. That's actually a really good stat, right? If you are dating, are you going to like, do I have a higher chance, right?
Yeah, I think it actually has a lot to do with that. The next question is like, why is that the case? Well, I think it has a lot to do with the gender ratio of the city, or at least perceived gender ratio. Like I lived in and worked in Hong Kong. And so I know that a lot of topic of interest among single people was how many more women lived in the city. And the perception was that there are a lot more single women than single men. And I think that perception may be contributing to, like more women just being a little bit more liberal when it comes to, And so I kind of see the same thing for like city like DC, where again, statistically, like if you look at the population, there is more single women than men.
Right.
And we see kind of a similar like a phenomenon. So I think it has to do with the gender ratio of the city.
Awesome. I mean, you seem to be setting me up perfectly for the next question, because you mentioned that you had worked in Hong Kong before. So I think, this is a bit of an Asian American thing as well, but it's like, coming from a very successful kind of corporate career, becoming that founder, at KAC, it's a question we get all the time. When's the right time? And I'm guessing a lot of bankers are sitting around scratching their heads right now. I was going to be an entrepreneur last year, and then COVID happened, right? So it's like, now's not a great time. I'm going to keep my paycheck. But ironically, if we look back to 2008, for example, which everybody kind of remembers, that was when the greatest companies were founded, right? Difficulty and resilience. So, can you share a little bit more about like that experience and, give some, I guess, some words of wisdom, I guess, to people that are thinking about making the plunge?
Yeah. So a couple of things. So the way I made a decision to kind of switch my career is And you know, like if I'm completely honest, like I loved working for JP Morgan and being in investment, but I knew when I was in it that, oh, I'm not going to be doing this long term because my heart was not 100% in it. And so that was there. So I think it's a little bit harder if you love investment banking and love finance, right? So then it's a harder kind of choice.
That's a harder person too.
So that's why I just going to put that out there. The framework that I use to make a decision, and this is a framework that I use to make decisions still now for big decision is, you know, I saw Jeff Bezos talking about this once. It's called regret minimization model, which is, hey, like when you have a big life decision to make, if you just try to imagine yourself when you're like 80 years old, you know, near death, and looking back to your life, are you going to be regretting if you don't do this? Or if the answer is yes, then do it. Like really, life is really too, you know, I think we live life like we're going to live forever, but life is short, you know? So I think for all of us, ultimately what we want is like when we are 80 and we can, if we can say like, wow, I lived a really good life, what more can we want, right? And so like I think asking yourself that question is a really good question. And the second thing is, you really, when you do that, you really have to listen. I think a lot of us know the answer, but we kind of like come up with, and I do this all the time too, so it's not like I'm not lecturing, but like because changes are hard, and we have resistance, we kind of start coming up with excuses why that actually isn't the answer right now. But like if you really ask yourself that deep down, you know what's true for you. And so do you have the courage to really listen to yourself? I think that's the second step. And for you to actually be able to get clarity on that, I think we just need to make a little bit more time, most of us, just to kind of sit with ourselves, whether it's like meditating or whatever else, like you to be able to hear really clearly the answer that's coming, that your body is telling you, the answer that you already know. And so like making the time to listen to it, and like having the courage to just be really honest about what that is. And the third thing is, I think with any changes, fear of something going wrong is of course natural. And then realistically, like if you're in finance and like, or most of us, right? Like, okay, you change your job or you stop for a while. Like, I think, of course, as human beings, we're geared towards like thinking about catastrophic, like, oh, I'm never going to find a job and whatever else. That's just how we're wired. But like, if you're being realistic, of course you can find another job, right? Of course. So you could even give yourself, like, this is what I did. Like we gave ourselves a year. We said, hey, we're going to just spend a year. A year is not a long time in grand scheme of things. Doesn't work out, just go back to whatever we were doing before, get a job. And if something really great happens, then just stick with it. If not, like, okay, well, that was a good experience, right? So give yourself a timeline so that you could, it doesn't feel like some kind of huge dramatic like decision that you're never going to be able to reverse. I think that could actually give you the courage to really be true to whatever answer is coming to you. And maybe the answer is like, no, actually, I don't want to be an entrepreneur, right? Like, this is all hype, and I actually kind of like doing this or doing something else. And so I think just kind of just being true to whatever is coming to us is really important.
I think that was an awesome wrap. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. Those final tips, I think there's a couple there that I need to listen to myself as I'm making these decisions. This was the Young Professionals Network session with Dawoon Kang from Coffee Meets Bagel. Happy holidays, everyone. Dawoon, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your experiences. See you next time, everyone. Happy holidays.
Bye.